Welcome everyone to this very fast session of the training on social economic valuation of degraded lands and wetlands. So in this session, we will make it as an introduction session where we shall be looking at the whole concept of ecosystem service valuation, and we will also be focusing on the concept of ecosystem service accounting. So from a glance, we shall be dissecting, as I said, the ecosystem service concept, where we shall try and understand what generally an ecosystem is, as well as try and understand the general interlinkages between the ecosystems or nature on one hand and the human well-being on the other hand. We shall also introduce and try and understand the different goods and services that we benefit from these ecosystems or nature. And at the end of the day, we shall be looking at how these services and goods can be packaged into meaningful economic values through the process that we call ecosystem service accounting. Now, from a very broad perspective, what is an ecosystem? We can define an ecosystem as a multifaceted complex that is very dynamic and is made up of living things like plants, animals, microorganisms, as well as non-living things or environments that all of them interact as a functional unit. So in other words, what we are trying to say is that an ecosystem is a biological community of interacting components, and where us as human beings are a central or integral part of. So the same ecosystems which are in reality embedded in nature have a very high potential to supply a range of goods and services. And these are the services that we are calling ecosystem service or ecosystem services. And these services are very fundamental to human well-being. And we can mention all the way from our health, our livelihoods, and very most importantly, our survival. And it actually goes without saying that everyone actually in the world depends on Earth's ecosystems and the services that it provides. So in essence, ecosystems cannot be perceived or thought to be providing any benefits without the presence of the primary users, in this case us or people, which we term them as human capital. The interaction also has to occur with other key assets like our communities, which we are calling the social capital, as well as our built environment, which represents the built capital. So in as much as we are saying that natural ecosystems provide goods and services, the caveat is that those goods and services are considered as benefits only if there is the presence of the other assets or capital, if you like, that I have mentioned, and they should be in an interacting situation. So basically, the ecosystem services are perceived as a contribution to the natural capital to human well-being, which forms only by its interaction with the human, the social, and the built capital. And the diagram here that I've put there tries to showcase this, and it shows how these interacting assets result in sustainable human well-being. So from this diagram, the natural capital is actually at the center stage, and it is considered to be the most vital because, as you can see, it sort of underpins all the other types of capital. And it turns out that natural capital is indeed the foundation on which our economy, society, and prosperity is built on. So in essence, we can say that natural capital constitutes an irreplaceable provider of prosperity. And this is particularly very true for developing countries where, based on research, about 30% of the total wealth are derived from natural capital. And you will appreciate this from the statistics that you're seeing on this diagram, which gives a very summarized list of natural capital of low-income countries. You'll also realize that some of the ecosystem services like biodiversity, water resources and marine resources have not been captured, but this more or less gives us a picture of how natural capital composition is in the developing countries. So this diagram shows that out of the overall wealth of low-income countries, about 1/3 actually comes from natural capital, with pasture land, forests and crops taking the lion's share, with about 77% of the natural capital composition. So this basically or evidently portrays that natural capital is an invaluable asset and plays an important role in the strategy of social economic development, especially in our developing world. Now, having understood that the natural environment in the broad set sense offers numerous amenities which can be used to the benefit of people. In summary, therefore, the concept of ecosystem services can be, in other words, defined as the interface between people and nature. And I know you may ask why. This is because it makes visible the key role of ecosystem functioning and biodiversity to support multiple benefits to us as humans. So basically, it establishes a link between the ecosystems, the ecosystem services they provide, and the human well-being they contribute to, in sort of a cascade flow from the natural to the human world. So this cascade flow, which is very fundamental in ecosystem services concept, generally describes a pathway of interrelations between ecosystems at one end and human well-being at the other end. And therefore, understanding the link between the natural capital and the social economic systems can lead to improved and more sustainable management of these very valuable ecosystems. Now that we have an understanding that ecosystem services are the direct and indirect contributions of ecosystems to human well-being, we will now move into understanding the different classes of ecosystem services. Now, the classification of ecosystem services is by character considered as a precondition for any attempt to measure, map, or value ecosystem services. And it is also considered as a gateway to communicating the findings in a more succinct or a very transparent way. So the ecosystem service framework from a broad perspective has several classifications with different typologies and approaches to classifying ecosystem services. And these classifications have been established generally, as I said, a guide for comprehensive ecosystem assessments and the subsequent reporting of the same values. So the categorization that has been used by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment is one of the most popular, and whose foundation lies within raising awareness in the society about the different benefits that the human populace generally gains from natural ecosystems. So the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment classification system defines 4 main ecosystem services categories that you can see on the diagram on your right, that contributes to the well-being of humans. And these are, we have the provisioning services, the regulating services, the supporting services, and the cultural services. So as a way of defining this further, I would say that provisioning services are basically the products or material or energy obtained from ecosystems, such as food, fresh water, wood, fiber, medicines, and so on and so forth. And this is what mainly the economists would call tangible goods, because these are things that we can touch and see at the same time. We also have regulating services, which basically are the services that ecosystems provide by acting as regulators of ecosystem processes. And for this, we have examples like climate regulation, we have natural hazard regulation, like things like flood control and soil erosion control. We also have the aspects like the purification of water, the management of waste, the pollination, the pest control. The list is quite wide. So you notice that these are services that we cannot see. And most of the time, if you do not understand environmental processes, you might not as well realize that these are services that are being provided by our natural ecosystems. And you will realize that unlike the provisioning services, these are services that are normally left out of economic analysis process. We also have supporting services, and these are services that underpin almost all the other services, and they can be defined as the services necessary for the production of other ecosystem services. So we have things like soil formation, nutrient cycling, the primary production, and so on and so forth. Finally, we have the cultural services from our ecosystems, and these include the non-material benefits that people obtain from ecosystems. Things like spiritual enrichment, intellectual development, recreation, aesthetic values, and so on and so forth. So we shall get to really appreciate and learn more about the ecosystem services in the succeeding topics of this workshop. And I am confident that by the end of the workshop, we shall have a better grip on understanding these important goods and services and how the different types actually impact on the human well-being. So we now have an understanding of what natural capital is. And as we said, it includes all of the resources that we easily recognize and measure, as well as the ecosystem services that are most of the time invisible to people. We are also aware that these values are not readily captured in markets, so their contribution to the economy is seldom known. And in most cases, people end up taking these services for granted without even knowing what it would cost if they are lost. So the big question now is, why does natural capital matter? A common understanding is that GDP is enough to describe a country's economic well-being. But the truth of the matter is the GDP only measures the value of goods and services from one perspective of the economic performance. And these are normally the outputs which are defined by things that we can see and touch. GDP, however, doesn't take into account the wealth that underpins this output. A full picture of a country's wealth, however, can only be obtained through wealth accounting, which includes all assets that contribute to our economic well-being, from buildings and factories, machines to infrastructure, to the human capital that we mentioned previously, the social capital, as well as the natural capital. As we have mentioned, natural capital is especially important to many developing countries because it makes up a large share of their total wealth, and the livelihoods of many subsistence communities depend directly on healthy ecosystems. But as is the case right now, currently GDP actually ignores natural capital. So natural capital accounts, basically what the Colwell tool tries to bring forth are actually sets of unbiased data for material natural resources. And ecosystem service accounting or natural capital accounting is basically the accounting of ecosystems and their services. It is a coherent and integrated approach to the assessment of the environment through the measurement of ecosystems and the measurement of the flows of services from ecosystems into economic and other human activity. And this can be done at a variety of scales, mostly with a focus to integrate the value of ecosystem services into accounting and reporting systems at all levels, from the national to the international levels. So through such assessments, the benefits that nature provides to people are increasingly being recognized and accounted for. And just to point out, the internationally agreed methodology for natural capital accounting is the SEEA, which is a central framework that contains the standard concepts, the definitions, the classifications, the accounting rules, as well as the tables for producing internationally comparable statistics on the environment and its relationship with the economy. The SEEA guides the compilation of consistent and comparable statistics and indicators for policy making, analysis, and research. And EA was one of the key frameworks that we considered during the development of the Colwell. So I would say it is in the interest of all countries to actually move beyond traditional GDP. Why? Because incorporating natural capital into national accounts can support inclusive development and better economic management. So the concept of accounting for natural capital has actually existed since the 80s, but little has been done to implement it. So the main big thing I would say now is to enhance the capacity of countries to implement the SEEA and to demonstrate its benefits to policymakers. Now this brings us to the end of our lesson, and looking forward to the next sessions.